So Charles Spencer has finally broken his silence, and the 4 words he reportedly threw back at a massive Netflix pitch are now bouncing around every royal-obsessed corner of the internet. And here's the thing, once you understand what was really on the table, his reaction stops sounding cold and starts sounding like the only sane response a man in his position could possibly give. Because this is a man who has quietly stood guard over one of the most valuable and emotionally loaded archives in modern history. Diana's private diaries, home movies nobody has ever seen, personal photographs locked away for nearly 3 decades. He hasn't opened that vault for money. He hasn't opened it for legacy. He hasn't opened it for the hundreds of producers who have knocked on that door since 1997. And the reason he finally spoke, the reason he reportedly stared at a proposal from his own nephew's production company and asked, "Is this a joke?" isn't just about a rejected documentary. It's about a promise, a private guilt, and a pattern of behavior he has apparently been watching pile up for years. So let's begin with the pitch itself, because once you see what was actually being requested, everything falls into place. The proposal was for a sweeping, definitive 30th anniversary Diana documentary, scheduled for 2027, sold as an emotional cinematic tribute fronted by her own son, Prince Harry. On paper, it reads like a certified hit, a love letter from a son to a lost mother. Netflix reportedly fell for it instantly, budget attached, green light almost warming up. But here's where the story turns. The project reportedly demanded access to Althorpe itself, the Spencer estate, the grounds where Diana grew up, the lake, the island where she is buried. They wanted her handwritten diaries, pages she scribbled for herself, never meant for a reader, let alone a global audience. They wanted the home movies nobody outside the Spencer family has ever laid eyes on. The real Diana, the unfiltered Diana, the private Diana. Without those pieces, the documentary would just be one more recycled reel of the same public footage every network has been rinsing for 30 years. With them, it would be the defining Diana film of the century. And then came the narrative angle, the framing that made the pitch irresistible in the room and reportedly devastating on the page. They wanted to draw a straight, unmissable line between Diana's war with the establishment and Meghan Markle's war with the same forces. Meghan positioned as the modern continuation of Diana's story, the 21st century woman who refused to be silenced. Diana's halo, formally passed on. Now picture what Charles Spencer saw when he read that. He had spent years watching pieces of Diana's jewelry reappear on Meghan at heavily photographed events. The butterfly earrings, the Cartier watch, the gold bracelets. Every appearance timed for a moment where the cameras weren't just possible, they were guaranteed. He had watched the 2021 Oprah interview lift almost the entire architecture of Diana's 1995 Panorama confessional beat for beat. The hushed lighting, the sympathetic interviewer, the sensation of secrets slipping into the air. He had watched their Netflix documentary series in which a couple attacking the media framed themselves as being hunted by the very same machine that destroyed Diana. And now, after all of it, they wanted the vault, the diaries, the island, the originals, to crown a successor. Of course he said what he said. Honestly, the only real surprise is that he kept it to 4 words. Those 4 words weren't aristocratic snobbery. They were 28 years of grief, guilt, and quiet penance compressed into a single sentence. Before we go deeper, if you're finding value in this breakdown of what's really happening under the surface, take a second to subscribe to Royal Exposure so nothing on this story slips past you. Now, to grasp why Charles Spencer's silence has been so absolute for so long, you have to travel back to a wound most royal coverage refuses to touch, and it's the key that unlocks the whole thing. By long-established accounts, it was Charles Spencer himself who first introduced his sister to Martin Bashir, the same journalist behind that 1995 Panorama interview. The same interview the world now knows was obtained through forged bank statements, fabricated evidence of surveillance, manufactured proof of betrayal, and calculated psychological manipulation. All of it engineered to convince a frightened, isolated woman that everyone around her was an enemy, and that her only escape was to sit in front of a camera and bleed for the nation. Her vulnerability wasn't a side effect of that broadcast. Her vulnerability was the product, and her younger brother, by these accounts, had unknowingly held the door open for it. When the full truth of how that interview was engineered finally surfaced years later, it reportedly hit Charles Spencer like a collapsing hillside. because it meant that he, however innocently, however unknowingly, had played a part in one of the most profound exploitations of his sister's pain during her lifetime. Sit with what that does to a person. You spend your entire adult life believing you are your sister's protector. You stand in Westminster Abbey in front of 2 billion viewers and vow to shield her sons from the machinery that broke her. And then you learn that the single most psychologically damaging media event of her final years walked through a door you personally opened. Everything since has been, by every account, an act of atonement. The sealed archives, the refusals stacking up decade after decade, the decision to bury Diana at Althorpe instead of surrendering her resting place to the institution, the unseen home movies, the handwritten diaries that no one outside the Spencer family has ever touched. Charles Spencer has been doing penance, making absolutely sure that nothing like Panorama can ever be done to Diana again. Not in life, not in death, not now, almost 30 years later. And in the process, he has managed something extraordinary. He has preserved Diana's mystery. There is a private Diana the public has never consumed. A real, human, unguarded Diana. And she still exists only because one man has been saying no for 3 decades. So when a courier turns up with a proposal asking for that very mystery to be repackaged as a streaming product, wrapped in a narrative that installs a new figure as her spiritual heir, his response stops looking like contempt and starts looking like the only response a man carrying that weight could give. But to really understand why this particular documentary mattered so desperately to the Sussex operation, you have to look honestly at where their media empire actually stood in early 2026. The $100 million Netflix deal, the 5-year arrangement bankrolling the California dream. It had been hanging by a thread. The flagship project meant to steady the ship was the lifestyle series With Love, Meghan. Instead, it became the iceberg. The reviews landed thick, fast, and brutal. The Evening Standard gave it 4 stars and still found space to mock it on the way out. The Times handed it 2 stars and described it, and this phrase honestly deserves to be preserved, as surely dull. The Daily Telegraph also gave it 2 stars, calling it an exercise in narcissism packed with extravagant brunches, celebrity friends, and business plugs. And then there was The Guardian. Pay attention here, because this matters. The Guardian is not a royalist paper. It has long argued for reform of the monarchy and has repeatedly, forcefully condemned the treatment of Meghan over the years. If any British outlet was predisposed to love this show, it was The Guardian. They gave it 1 star. One of their critics suggested it might be the last thing Meghan ever makes for Netflix. When the entire spectrum of British press, from Republican broadsheet to Royal Fan Weekly, arrives at the same verdict, that isn't a review problem. That's a product problem. Now here's the detail that sharpens everything. The couple's debut documentary, Harry and Meghan, which unpacked their exit from royal life, remains the most watched debut in Netflix history. That single fact is the skeleton key to this entire saga. Every project since, Heart of Invictus, Polo with Love Meghan, met progressively cooler receptions. The message from the audience couldn't be louder if it were written across the sky. The world isn't buying Meghan's lifestyle brand. The world is buying royal wounds. The only Sussex product that has ever genuinely sold is proximity to the crown and to Diana, which is exactly why, when the brunch economy collapsed, the pitch deck reached for the deepest royal wound available. The Netflix deal was reportedly close to expiring with renewal anything but certain. The Spotify deal had already collapsed. American Riviera Orchard, the lifestyle venture, wasn't finding its audience. According to royal commentator Ian Pelham Turner, losing Netflix would be a major blow, and recovery from it would be immensely difficult. Do you see what the Diana documentary really was? It wasn't a passion project. It was a rescue flare. The one card in the deck guaranteed to pull a global audience because it carried the only royal story bigger than their own exit. And the man at Althorpe tore it up with 4 words. Now let me hand you a frame for what was actually happening underneath all of this. Strip out the emotion for a moment and just look at the assets. When Harry and Meghan stepped back from royal duties and gave up the use of their HRH styles, they had to build a commercial life on something. What they had was fame with an expiry date and a single asset more bankable than everything else combined. Diana, her face, her myth, her martyrdom. In business terms, the Sussexes have been trading on a brand without a license because the actual license holder, the keeper of the archive, the custodian of the estate, the owner of the originals, was a 62-year-old man in Northamptonshire whom nobody in the Sussex operation had apparently thought to consult. Watch how the withdrawals grew. 2018, the aquamarine ring at the wedding reception. The first borrowing, received warmly, felt like family, then the butterfly earrings, the Cartier watch, the bracelets. Every appearance timed to a guaranteed photograph. 2021, the Oprah interview, the Panorama architecture rebuilt from the ground up, Diana's template repurposed, then the Netflix documentary series, her tragedy reshaped into their origin story, Diana as justification, as framework, as foundation, and finally, 2026, a request for the vault itself. The diaries, the home movies, Althorpe as a film set, the halo fitted to a new head. They began by borrowing her jewelry. They ended by asking for her soul, every withdrawal larger than the last, everyone made without consulting the man who keeps the account. And the final one bounced. Here's the thing about unauthorized withdrawals. They work beautifully right up until the moment you need the bank manager to sign off on a real loan. And the bank manager, it turns out, has been quietly watching every single transaction. Now we arrive at the part of this story that changes the whole picture. The development most royal coverage has either missed entirely or buried in a single line. Charles Spencer, by all accounts, did not stop at rejecting the pitch. He reportedly did not make his call in isolation. Sources close to the palace have been quietly describing a relationship most royal watchers have been sleeping on completely. The understanding between Diana's brother and Diana's eldest son. It's no secret that Prince William has been privately furious for years about the commercialization of his mother's image, but understand William's position. He is the future king. Every move he makes triggers consequences. He can't publicly block his own brother's media projects without manufacturing a global headline about palace censorship and civil war inside the family. When the institution blocks something, it always reads as the establishment protecting itself. But when Diana's own brother, the man who stood in Westminster Abbey and vowed before 2 billion people to protect her sons, calls a project a joke, that isn't institutional control. That's family. Nobody can spin it. There is no palace to blame. There is only one brother telling another brother, in plain language, exactly what he thinks of what is being done with their sister's memory. Do you see the elegance of it? The one man free to say no is the one man whose no cannot be weaponized. William never had to lift a finger. And I would suggest to you that this isn't coincidence so much as alignment. 2 guardians of the same memory reaching the same wall from different directions. Think about it this way. When 2 governments can't speak to each other without losing face, the message travels through a back channel, a private citizen, an elder statesman, someone with standing on both sides and a uniform on neither. The envoy says the unsayable precisely because he holds no office. That is exactly the role Charles Spencer now occupies inside this family conflict. He has standing with the public, blood ties to both princes, moral authority over Diana's memory, and no constitutional position whatsoever. The palace cannot say no to Netflix without a scandal. William cannot say no to Harry without a headline. But the Earl of Northamptonshire can say no to everyone in 4 words before breakfast. And the only institution taking the hit is Montecito. And then came the move nobody saw coming. In a discreet but genuinely remarkable step, Charles Spencer is said to have written to Prince William, urging the future king to publicly address the deepening crisis between Harry and the royal family. And before anyone mistakes this for a peace offering, let me be blunt. By all accounts, this plea was not about emotional reconciliation. It was about strategy, stability, the global standing of the British monarchy. The reported contents are striking in their clarity. The silence cannot continue. Harry, in the eyes of the world's media, has become a symbol of weakness, no longer seen as the soldier, the prince, the statesman, but as a reactive figure consumed by the story of his wife. Charles Spencer reportedly warned that by ignoring Harry entirely, by treating him with total indifference, the royal family is handing the Sussexes an open microphone, letting them dominate the global story unchallenged while traditional royal values are ridiculed in real time. Read that again. Let it settle. Diana's brother, the man who once stood at her funeral and challenged the Windsors to their faces, is now reportedly urging the future king to defend the crown's image. If you wanted a single data point to measure how completely Harry and Meghan have rearranged the loyalties inside this family, there it is. Meanwhile, the deeper family fracture has not moved, not an inch. According to recent reporting, the royal family is open to some form of peace talks with Prince Harry, but remains deeply reluctant to reconcile with Meghan Markle. Just weeks after Harry sent aides to London to meet with King Charles's communications secretary, it emerged that the core of the rift comes down to one word: trust. There is none. The royal family's greatest fear, And I want you to sit with this because it really is extraordinary. Isn't Meghan's anger? It isn't her grievances, it's her content calendar. They are afraid that any private conversation with her becomes raw material for the next media venture. Every honest moment, every family exchange, every quiet word over dinner, all of it potentially filed, packaged, and repackaged into a streaming product within 18 months. The same reporting suggests Harry may eventually find himself traveling to the United Kingdom alone, without Meghan, without Archie and Lilibet, if he wants any kind of relationship with what remains of his family. King Charles has held a deliberate silence across the 5,000 miles separating him from his youngest son, even as Harry has reportedly offered to share his diary dates with the family as a gesture of transparency. William and Catherine have not spoken to the Sussexes in years. That is the true inheritance of this saga, not a documentary, not a streaming deal. Two brothers who cannot find a road back to each other, and a family watching from Althorp with a gate that stays locked. Before you pick a side, I want to give both arguments the weight they deserve. On one side, those who support Charles Spencer and Prince William argue that Diana's story has already been told and retold across thousands of hours of documentary content spanning 30 years. That turning her memory into a content pipeline risks trivializing the emotional weight of her death. That the 30th anniversary should be a moment of quiet reflection, not a premiere with a marketing plan and a Montecito production credit attached. On the other side, Harry's defenders raise a case that deserves a proper hearing. Diana shaped both of her sons equally. Harry carries a dimension of the historical record nobody else alive can supply. What it was actually like to be her child, to hold her hand through hospital wards and homeless shelters, to lose her at 15 and carry that loss in full public view for the rest of your life. Nobody can take that perspective away from him. Nobody should. But try standing in both pairs of shoes before you decide. Imagine you are William. The most painful event of your childhood is being scheduled as a content drop with a premiere date and a Netflix algorithm by your own brother's production partners. You never consented to your grief becoming a product. You never signed off on your mother's death being turned into a launch event. And yet here it is, being packaged and pitched inside boardrooms you were never invited into by people who stand to profit from the worst day of your life. Now imagine you are Harry. You are being told the story of your own mother, the woman who took you to homeless shelters specifically to teach you what your privilege was actually for, is somehow not yours to tell. You watched her die. You walked behind her coffin at 13 years old in front of the entire world. You carried that grief through your entire adult life, through wars, through scandals, through the very public unraveling of your place inside a family that seemed incapable of acknowledging how broken everything had become. And now you are being told that even your memories are subject to somebody else's approval. Both of those positions hurt. Both are human. Both are true at the same time. And the uncomfortable reality is that this conflict may never be resolved, because it isn't really a conflict about a documentary at all. It is a conflict about ownership, about who gets to tell a story when that story belongs, in different but equally legitimate ways, to more than one person. The villain in this story, if you insist on one, doesn't live at Althorp or in Montecito or inside Kensington Palace. It lives in the commercial machinery wrapped around the grief. The apparatus that looks at a mother's handwritten diaries and calculates their streaming value. The algorithm that turns a family's worst years into one documentary that breaks platform records. The industry that has spent 30 years building an economy on Diana's tragedy and then acts surprised when the people closest to that tragedy want a seat at the table. That is what Charles Spencer has been quietly resisting for 28 years. No press releases, no applause, just refusal. The question left on the table is whether it is ever right to spend Diana's legacy as currency, even by her own son. Was Charles Spencer right to slam the vault shut? Or does Harry's grief give him a claim no gatekeeper, however principled, can override? Carry this thought with you, whatever you decide. Diana was exploited once by a man with forged documents and a camera. Her brother has decided she will not be exploited again by a man with a streaming deal and a rescue plan. The vault at Althorp stays shut. And perhaps that is the most powerful statement anyone connected to Diana has made in 30 years. Not a documentary, not an interview, not a carefully worded press release. Just a locked gate and a man who refuses to turn grief into content. In a media landscape built entirely on doing exactly that, the silence itself has become the loudest thing in the room.